The city had a way of flattening moments. Cars flowed like water through narrow streets, horns punctuating the air in impatient bursts. People moved fast, eyes forward, minds already several minutes ahead of their bodies. Nothing lingered. Nothing waited. Marcus Hale preferred it that way. He stood just outside the glass entrance of the Meridian building, one hand already lifting his watch as if time itself were a negotiable thing. 48 years old, impeccably dressed, his suit cut clean and precise, Marcus carried himself with the quiet efficiency of someone who was rarely interrupted, and even more rarely surprised. His driver waited a few steps away, door open, engine idling. Another meeting behind him. Another set of signatures, polite nods, carefully neutral smiles. Everything had gone exactly as expected. It always did. Marcus took one step forward. Then another. He didn't see the girl at first. She was standing near the edge of the wide marble steps, not in the way, not asking for attention. Too still to register as urgency. Too quiet to trigger instinct. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her dress was simple, clean, but worn thin at the edges, the kind of fabric that had been washed many times and never replaced. Her shoes were scuffed, toes dulled from too much pavement. Her hair was braided neatly, pulled back from her face with care that spoke of routine, not neglect. She held nothing in her hands. No cup. No sign. No outstretched palm. Marcus's foot touched the pavement below the steps. That's when she spoke. "Sir." The word was soft. Respectful. Not urgent. Marcus didn't stop. He had heard that word 1,000 times in 1,000 different tones, desperate, rehearsed, demanding. The city trained you to filter it out. But then she added something else. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Not louder. Not pleading. Just precise. Marcus slowed without meaning to. His driver noticed before he did, shifting his weight, glancing back. The door remained open, waiting. Marcus told himself he was only pausing to avoid rudeness. That it cost nothing to hear a sentence before walking away. He turned slightly, just enough to see her properly. She looked up at him, not wide-eyed, not fearful. There was no practiced sadness in her expression. Just a steadiness that felt out of place in a city that taught children to perform need early. "Yes," he said, already aware of how clipped his voice sounded. She nodded once, as if acknowledging permission. "I won't take much time," she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow almost imperceptibly. Most adults didn't bother to promise that. She hesitated, just for a breath, as if choosing her words carefully. When she spoke again, her voice didn't shake. "Do you think people remember the small things, or only the big ones?" The question landed awkwardly between them. It wasn't what Marcus expected. Not a request. Not a story. Not a problem to solve. A question. He studied her more closely now. The way she stood straight. The way she met his eyes without challenging him. The way her hands remained folded calmly in front of her, as though she had already decided not to reach. "That depends," he said after a moment. "On the person." She considered that. "My teacher says small things are easy to forget," she said. "But my grandmother says they're the hardest." Marcus felt something tighten. Not discomfort, exactly. Something closer to attention. "And what do you think?" he asked. She shrugged slightly, the movement small but deliberate. "I think people remember what makes them stop," she said. The words were simple. Not polished. But they carried weight in the way unpracticed truths often did. Marcus glanced at his watch again, then back at her. "You stopped me," he said. She nodded. Just for a second. A breeze passed between them, lifting the hem of her dress, carrying the distant sound of traffic. The world continued as if nothing unusual were happening. Marcus waited. She took another breath. I found something earlier, she said. It isn't mine. She reached into her pocket, not hurried, not secretive, and pulled out a folded receipt, creased and smoothed again and again, as though she had been handling it carefully. I don't know who it belongs to, she said. But it felt important. She held it out, but not too close. Not pushing it into his space. Just offering. Marcus looked at the paper, then at her face. Why show it to me? He asked. Her answer came without hesitation. Because you look like someone people listen to. The driver shifted again, uneasy now. Marcus didn't move. After a moment, he accepted the receipt. Their fingers didn't touch. Thank you, he said. She smiled, not broadly, not triumphantly. Just enough to soften her eyes. I can pay you back, she added suddenly. Marcus blinked. Pay me back for what? For your time, she said. I don't have it now. But when I'm grown. I will. I promise. The word promise settled heavily between them. Marcus folded the receipt once more and slipped it into his jacket pocket, though he didn't yet know why. He nodded. I'll remember that, he said. She nodded back, satisfied, as if the exchange was complete. Marcus turned toward the car again. But this time, he didn't look at his watch. He was already late. And for the first time that day, he didn't mind. Marcus sat in the back of the car longer than necessary. The door had closed. The engine had merged back into traffic. Buildings slid past the tinted windows in familiar succession, steel, glass, concrete, repetition. The city resumed its rhythm, efficient and indifferent. Yet his attention stayed behind on the marble steps. He hadn't looked back. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps because he didn't want to see the girl already gone, absorbed into the same current of motion that erased people so easily. Or perhaps because he didn't want to test whether the pause had been real at all. Sir, his driver asked gently from the front seat. Marcus didn't answer at first. He slipped his hand into his jacket pocket and felt the folded receipt there, thin and unimportant by any financial measure. He hadn't looked at it yet. Something about the way she had offered it. Careful, almost ceremonial, had made him hesitate. Everything all right? The driver asked again. Yes, Marcus said. Just, give me a minute. The driver nodded and returned his focus to the road. Marcus unfolded the receipt. It was from a small grocery store several blocks away. The paper was faded, the ink partially worn. A loaf of bread. A carton of milk. A single apple. Nothing unusual. Nothing that explained the weight the paper seemed to carry. But then he noticed the handwriting. On the back, written neatly in pencil, were 3 words. Found this today. Below it, smaller. Will return. No name. No address. Marcus frowned. It wasn't proof of anything. Not ownership. Not loss. Just intent. He folded the paper again, slower this time, and slipped it back into his pocket. Outside, the city moved on, unconcerned. He told himself that was the end of it. The rest of the day unfolded as expected. Meetings. Calls. A working lunch that tasted of nothing. Conversations that blurred together in practiced language, percentages, forecasts, cautious optimism. Marcus contributed when required, listened when expected, signed when necessary. Yet, in the quiet moments between engagements, the girl's voice returned. Do you think people remember the small things, or only the big ones? He found himself replaying the question without trying to answer it. At one point, during a presentation he had heard versions of a dozen times before, Marcus caught himself tapping the edge of the table with his pen, once, then twice, matching the rhythm of her measured speech. He stopped. Late afternoon brought him back to the Meridian building for a brief follow-up meeting. As he stepped out of the elevator, he glanced automatically toward the entrance. The marble steps were empty. Of course they were. Still, the absence registered more sharply than he expected. That evening, Marcus returned home later than planned. The house was quiet, lights dimmed in the hallways, the staff already dispersed. He loosened his tie as he walked, the knot falling open with practiced ease. He stopped at the console table near the entryway and emptied his pockets, keys, phone, wallet. The receipt remained. He hesitated, then placed it carefully beside the others, aligning it straight rather than tossing it aside. He didn't know why. Dinner came and went. He ate standing at the counter, eyes drifting to the small square of paper more than once. At some point, he realized he was annoyed, not at the interruption earlier, but at himself. This wasn't how his mind worked. He didn't carry moments home. He didn't linger on strangers. And yet. He picked up the receipt again and studied the handwriting once more. The letters were deliberate, formed slowly, as if written by someone taught to take care even when no one was watching. "Will return." Return it to who? Marcus murmured aloud. There was no answer. The following morning, Marcus altered his routine. It was a small change. Insignificant, really. He asked his driver to take a different route, one that passed the small grocery store listed on the receipt. Traffic was heavier there. Pedestrians crowded the sidewalks. Vendors called out, voices layered and overlapping. Marcus watched the street carefully, though he told himself he wasn't looking for anything in particular. He saw children in school uniforms. Office workers clutching coffee cups. A woman arguing into her phone as she crossed the street against the light. But not her. By the time they passed the store, Marcus felt a faint, irrational disappointment. "Everything okay, sir?" the driver asked. "Yes," Marcus replied. "Just curious." The driver nodded, though curiosity was not a trait he often associated with his employer. Days passed. The receipt stayed where Marcus had placed it, moved only when the table was cleaned, always returned to the same position. He didn't frame it. Didn't make a show of it. But he didn't throw it away either. Once, during a meeting with his legal team, someone mentioned a minor contractual detail, an oversight so small it had nearly been missed. Marcus interrupted the discussion. "Fix it," he said. One of the associates hesitated. "It's not likely to matter." Marcus thought of the girl's steady gaze. "It matters," he said simply. The room went quiet. A week later, Marcus found himself back at the Meridian building earlier than usual. As he stepped outside, he scanned the steps without admitting why. They were empty again. He took a breath, almost amused at himself, and turned toward the waiting car. "Sir," a voice said softly. Marcus stopped. He didn't need to turn around to know. But he did. She stood a few feet away this time, not at the edge of the steps but closer, as if familiarity had granted her permission to shorten the distance. Her dress was different, though just as worn. Her braids were redone, tighter, neater. She looked up at him, composed. "I said I wouldn't take much time," she said. Marcus felt the pause happen again, uninvited, unmistakable. "You did," he replied. She nodded, then reached into her pocket. "I found who it belongs to," she said. "The receipt." Marcus's hand went instinctively to his jacket pocket, feeling the folded paper still there. "And?" he asked. She smiled, just slightly. "They live far," she said. "But I'm going tomorrow." He studied her face. "You're keeping your promise," he said. She met his gaze. "Yes, sir." Something shifted then, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough that Marcus felt it settle somewhere deep and permanent. He hadn't planned to be stopped again. But here he was. And this time, he didn't glance at his watch at all. Marcus didn't ask how she'd found the owner. He didn't ask where far was, or how long tomorrow would take for a girl her size, on streets that asked too much of children too early. He already knew the answers wouldn't sit comfortably. Do you want help getting there? He asked instead. The question surprised her, not because of its content, but because of how easily it came, as if he'd already decided something before speaking. She shook her head. No, sir. The refusal was immediate. Polite. Firm. Marcus waited, giving her space to add more if she chose to. My grandmother says, she continued, if someone helps you keep a promise, it stops being yours. That landed heavier than he expected. He studied her again, not as a passerby now, but as someone measuring weight, of words, of intention. And what if the promise is too heavy, he asked. She considered this carefully, eyes lowering for a moment, then lifting again. Then you carry it slower, she said. Marcus exhaled softly through his nose. Not a laugh. Something close to it, but quieter. You're certain? He asked. Yes, sir. There was no pride in it. No challenge. Just certainty. He nodded once. All right, he said. Then I won't interfere. She seemed relieved, not because he had agreed, but because he had understood. The next day, Marcus thought of her before noon. This, too, was unusual. Between calls, he found his attention drifting to the receipt still resting on his console table at home. He imagined the girl holding it carefully, folding it back into her pocket, walking longer than she should have to walk. He told himself she was resourceful. She had already proven that. Still. During a brief lull, Marcus opened his phone and searched the address of the grocery store again, then the surrounding neighborhood. He traced possible routes in his mind, measuring distance the way he once measured risk. He closed the app without doing anything further. You said you wouldn't interfere, he reminded himself. Promises mattered. That evening, as dusk softened the city's sharp edges, Marcus left his office later than planned. The sky had darkened into deep blue, streetlights flickering on one by one. As he exited the building, he looked instinctively toward the steps. She wasn't there. He waited longer than necessary, then turned toward the car. A movement caught his attention across the street. She was walking carefully along the sidewalk, the receipt clutched in her hand now, no longer hidden away. Her pace was steady but slower than usual, as if the day had already asked much of her. Marcus hesitated. He could call out. He could offer the car, the driver, the convenience that had always been at his disposal. Instead, he watched. From a distance, unnoticed. She stopped once, adjusting the strap of her worn shoes. Another time, she paused to let a group of adults pass, shrinking slightly to give them room. No one noticed her. Except him. When she reached the corner, she turned briefly, as if sensing something behind her. Their eyes met across the street. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She nodded once. Then she continued on her way. Marcus stood still long after she disappeared from view. The following morning, the receipt was gone from his table. At first, he thought one of the staff had moved it. He checked the surrounding surfaces, then the drawer beneath. Nothing. A strange, hollow feeling opened in his chest, quick and unwelcome. Later that afternoon, his assistant approached him with a small envelope. This was delivered for you, she said. No return address. Marcus took it, fingers already recognizing the thinness of the paper inside. He opened it slowly. The receipt lay folded exactly as before. On the back, beneath the original words, a new line had been added. Returned. Below it, smaller still. Thank you for waiting. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Not because he was overwhelmed, but because something had completed itself. That night, Marcus sat alone in his study, the receipt resting on his desk. He realized then that the girl hadn't needed his money, or his time, or his influence. She had needed one thing only: to be believed. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, the city humming faintly beyond the walls. Somewhere out there, a little girl was learning what it cost to keep a promise. And for the first time in a very long while, Marcus wondered what his own promises had cost him, and which ones he had stopped carrying slowly enough to feel their weight. Weeks passed. Not the kind that announce themselves with milestones or disruptions, but the quiet ones that slip into routine and settle there unnoticed. Marcus returned to his schedules, his meetings, his carefully calibrated decisions. The world resumed its expectations of him, and he met them without hesitation. Outwardly, nothing had changed. But certain absences have weight. Marcus no longer dismissed small delays with irritation. When someone paused before answering a question, he waited instead of filling the silence. When a junior associate hesitated during a presentation, Marcus let the moment breathe, watching closely to see whether uncertainty might turn into clarity. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. Either way, he no longer rushed past it. He didn't know when this shift had begun. He only knew it felt deliberate, like walking slower without realizing you had chosen to. One afternoon, during a site visit for a new development, Marcus stood with a group of executives as they reviewed plans spread across a temporary table. The project manager spoke quickly, eager to impress, pointing out figures and projections. A young woman stood slightly behind the group, holding a tablet. She hadn't spoken once. Marcus noticed her stillness immediately. "Is there something you want to add?" he asked, interrupting the flow of polished speech. The woman looked startled. "Me?" "Yes." She hesitated, glancing at her supervisor, then back at Marcus. "Well," she said slowly, "there's a minor structural issue that won't show up until later. It's small now, but it could become expensive if it's ignored." The project manager frowned. "We've already accounted for." Marcus lifted a hand. "Let her finish." She did. By the time she was done, the table was quiet. "Good catch," Marcus said. "Fix it." The woman nodded, visibly relieved. As they moved on, Marcus felt a familiar sensation, recognition without memory. He didn't connect it consciously to the girl, but the shape of it was the same. A pause. A question. An unseen weight finally acknowledged. That evening, Marcus walked instead of taking the car. It was an impulsive choice, one he didn't justify even to himself. He dismissed his driver early and headed down the street alone, hands in his coat pockets, pace unhurried. The city looked different when he wasn't moving through it behind glass. He passed a small grocery store and slowed. It wasn't the same one from the receipt, but it reminded him of it. The smell of bread drifted through the open door. A bell chimed softly as customers came and went. Inside, a girl stood near the counter, counting coins carefully into her palm. Marcus stopped just outside the entrance. She wasn't the girl. He knew that immediately. Different posture. Different eyes. But the care was the same, the way her fingers touched each coin as if it mattered. He waited until she finished, then continued walking. He didn't go in. At home, the receipt remained on his desk, now flattened and pressed beneath a paperweight. He hadn't framed it. That felt excessive. But he hadn't hidden it either. Sometimes, when late-night work stretched on longer than planned, his gaze drifted toward it. Returned. The word had begun to feel less like a conclusion and more like a marker. A reminder that something could be completed without being consumed. One Saturday morning, Marcus attended a charity board meeting he usually delegated to someone else. He listened as members discussed numbers, optics, and outcomes. The conversation was efficient, well-meaning, and strangely hollow. What about follow-up? Marcus asked suddenly. Several heads turned. Follow-up, one board member repeated. Yes, Marcus said. After the assistance is given. Who checks back? There was a brief pause. Well, another member said carefully, that's not typically part of the model. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Then the model is incomplete. The room went quiet. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. That afternoon, Marcus found himself near the Meridian building again. It wasn't intentional. At least, that's what he told himself. He stood at the top of the marble steps, hands at his sides, watching people pass, fast, distracted, purposeful. Children moved between adults like afterthoughts, rarely noticed unless they made noise. Marcus scanned the edges instinctively. She wasn't there. He didn't feel disappointment this time. Only awareness. He turned and walked away slowly, leaving the space exactly as he'd found it, except for the imprint she had left behind, invisible and permanent. Some encounters don't repeat themselves. They don't need to. They simply widen the space you notice afterward. Marcus didn't think of her every day. That was the part that surprised him most. He had expected, if the moment meant anything at all, that it would linger loudly, replay itself in memory the way unusual encounters sometimes did. But it didn't. It came and went quietly, surfacing only when invited. Which, he realized, was exactly how she had spoken. The question returned first during a board meeting. The discussion had stretched longer than intended, looping back on itself as it often did when no one wanted to be the first to challenge consensus. A proposal sat in the center of the table, polished and attractive on the surface, buoyed by confident projections. Marcus listened without interrupting. At the far end of the table, a senior partner cleared his throat. We all agree this is the safest path forward. Several heads nodded. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair. Safe for who? He asked. The room stilled. The question wasn't confrontational. It wasn't sharp. It was quiet enough that it required attention. The partner hesitated. Well, for the company, obviously. Marcus waited. The pause stretched, uncomfortable now. And who else? Marcus prompted. Someone shifted in their seat. Another glanced down at their notes. The proposal began to look less complete under the weight of the silence. Later, when the meeting adjourned with the decision postponed, rare, but not unwelcome, Marcus gathered his papers slowly. He realized then that he hadn't been thinking about risk or strategy at all. He had been thinking about the girl's voice. Do you think people remember the small things, or only the big ones? A week later, the question followed him somewhere unexpected. Marcus attended a private school function at the insistence of a longtime acquaintance. The auditorium buzzed with conversation, parents comparing schedules, faculty exchanging practiced pleasantries. Marcus took a seat near the aisle. On stage, a group of children stood in a loose line, each holding a sheet of paper. They were meant to speak briefly, something rehearsed, something safe. One boy stepped forward and delivered his lines confidently. Applause followed. Another child stumbled, words tangling together, drawing polite encouragement from the audience. Then a girl stepped forward. She didn't rush. She adjusted the paper in her hands, looked up once, then began. Her voice was soft but steady. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. It wasn't impressive in the way confidence usually was, but it held the room in a different way. Marcus felt it immediately. The way attention sharpened. The way people leaned in without realizing they had. When she finished, there was a brief silence before the applause began, longer than usual, as if the room needed a moment to recalibrate. Marcus clapped last. He didn't know the girl. He didn't need to. That night, He returned home later than planned and poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink. He stood at the window, city lights stretching outward like a constellation he no longer tried to memorize. He thought again of the promise. "I'll pay you back when I'm grown." It hadn't been a dramatic declaration. No one else had heard it. No one had been meant to. And yet it had followed him, into boardrooms, into classrooms, into moments where silence asked to be respected rather than filled. Marcus realized something then, with a clarity that surprised him. The girl hadn't changed his life. She had changed his pace. And in doing so, she had altered the way questions landed. How long they were allowed to exist before being answered. The next morning, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He asked for a report to be rewritten. Not because it was wrong. But because it moved too quickly past the details. "Slow it down," he told his assistant. "There's something we're missing." His assistant blinked. Of course. Marcus turned back to his desk. Beside him, under the paperweight, the receipt remained, quiet, unassuming, complete. Returned. He touched the edge of the paper briefly, then withdrew his hand. Some promises don't demand repayment. They ask only that you listen long enough for the question to finish forming. Marcus hadn't planned to attend the community review meeting. It was the sort of thing that appeared on his calendar automatically, an obligation inherited from earlier commitments, usually handled by representatives and summarized later in a short email. This one, however, sat there unresolved after a last-minute cancellation by his delegate. Without fully understanding why, Marcus decided to go himself. The building was older than most of the projects he funded, brick instead of glass, narrow hallways instead of open lobbies. The chairs in the multipurpose room didn't match. The lights hummed faintly overhead. He arrived early. A handful of people were already there. A city coordinator setting up folders, two men discussing something quietly near the window, a woman arranging chairs into straighter lines than necessary. Marcus took a seat near the back, unnoticed. He didn't mind. The meeting began without ceremony. The coordinator outlined zoning concerns, infrastructure limitations, projected costs. The language was careful, neutral, technical, designed to keep emotion out of the room. Marcus listened. He always did. Halfway through, a teacher stood to speak. She talked about overcrowded classrooms, about children sharing books, about after-school programs stretched thin. Her voice was calm, but the strain was there. Marcus nodded slightly, making notes. Then a small movement near the doorway caught his attention. A girl slipped inside quietly, easing the door closed behind her. She took a seat in the last row, a few chairs away from Marcus. He recognized her instantly. Not because of her clothes. They were different now. Not because of her hair, it was pulled back in a new style. But because of the way she sat. Straight. Still. Attentive. She didn't fidget. She didn't look around. She placed her hands in her lap and focused forward, as though the room deserved her respect. Marcus felt the pause before it reached him. She hadn't seen him yet. The coordinator moved on to public comments. A man spoke briefly about transportation. Another about lighting near the park. Each comment was noted, acknowledged, and set aside. Then the coordinator hesitated. "There's time for one more," she said. "If anyone." The girl raised her hand. It wasn't dramatic. Just high enough to be noticed. The coordinator blinked. "Yes." The girl stood, smoothing the front of her dress once before speaking. "I'm not here to complain," she said. "I just want to explain something." The room stilled, not because she demanded it, but because her tone invited it. Marcus leaned forward slightly. She didn't look at him. She spoke to the room. "My grandmother says places remember how they're treated," she continued. "If you fix something but don't stay, it breaks again. A few people exchanged glances. She went on, carefully. If you help children, but don't come back to see if it worked, they think they weren't important enough to check on. Her hands remained folded. Her voice stayed level. I know money helps, she said. But people help longer. The coordinator nodded slowly. Thank you, she said, clearly unsure how to respond. The girl sat down. Marcus didn't move. Not yet. When the meeting ended, people gathered their things and drifted toward the exits. Conversations resumed, lighter now, relieved. The girl stood and turned. Their eyes met. There it was, that instant of recognition that didn't need words. She didn't smile. Neither did he. She approached him calmly, stopping a respectful distance away. Hello, sir, she said. Hello, Marcus replied. She glanced briefly at the folder under his arm, then back at his face. You came, she said. Yes, Marcus answered. I did. She nodded once, satisfied, not impressed, not surprised. I'm glad, she said. It's easier to explain things when people are in the room. Marcus felt something shift again, quietly, deeply. You explained them well, he said. Thank you. She paused. Then, as if remembering something important, she added, I kept my promise. I know, Marcus said. She searched his face for a moment, then smiled, not broadly, but fully. That, more than anything else, stayed with him. As they walked out together, Marcus realized something that made him stop just inside the doorway. He had assumed their story was finished. He had been wrong. Some questions don't end when they're answered. They wait. For the right place. They didn't leave together. Not at first. Marcus held the door open as she passed through, then lingered behind, allowing the flow of people to separate them naturally. He told himself it was instinct, habit, even. The need to think before speaking. But her words followed him out anyway. People help longer. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even advice. It was a fact, offered without expectation. Marcus stood on the steps of the building, watching the crowd thin. The girl had already disappeared into the stream of pedestrians, her small figure absorbed easily, as if she had never been there at all. Except she had. And now the space she left behind felt unfinished. Over the next few days, Marcus tried to return to normal. He reviewed contracts. He approved budgets. He sat through briefings where people spoke in efficient language about long-term impact and sustainable involvement. He nodded, contributed where appropriate, and moved on. But something in him resisted closure. At one meeting, a consultant presented a polished plan for a community initiative, short-term funding, clear metrics, a defined end date. This gives us visibility without overextension, the consultant said confidently. Marcus studied the slide longer than necessary. And after, he asked. The consultant hesitated. After the term ends? Yes, Marcus said. After the money leaves. Well, the consultant replied carefully, that would depend on local follow-through. Marcus leaned back. Which we won't see, he said. The room went quiet. We can build, Marcus continued, his voice calm, or we can commit. Those are not the same thing. Someone cleared their throat. Another glanced down at their notes. The consultant adjusted his glasses. Are you suggesting we extend the program? I'm suggesting we stay long enough to know whether it worked. The slide was never shown again. That evening, Marcus returned home with the weight of the day still clinging to him. He loosened his tie, poured a glass of water, and stood at the counter without drinking it. His eyes drifted, again, to the receipt under the paperweight. Returned. He removed the paperweight and picked up the receipt, turning it over slowly. The pencil marks were beginning to fade, softened by time and handling. For the first time, Marcus wondered what had happened after the return. What the owner of the lost items had said. Whether they had thanked her. Whether they had asked her name. Whether the moment had mattered to anyone but him. The next Saturday, Marcus did something he hadn't planned to do. He went back to the neighborhood near the grocery store. Not in his car. He walked. The sidewalks were uneven here. The buildings older. People moved more slowly, conversations lingering at corners, faces familiar to one another in ways the city center rarely allowed. Marcus passed the grocery store and paused. Inside, a woman stood behind the counter, arranging produce. He entered. "Excuse me," Marcus said. "A few weeks ago, a young girl returned a lost receipt here." The woman looked up, then smiled faintly. "Yes," she said. "I remember her." Marcus nodded. Is she around?" The woman shook her head. "Not today." She hesitated, then added, "She comes by sometimes. Helps when she can." Marcus glanced around the store. "She seems responsible." The woman laughed softly. "That's one word for it." "What's her name?" Marcus asked. The woman paused, studying him. "Why do you ask?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. "Because she asked me a question," he said finally. "And I don't think I ever answered it properly." The woman considered him for a moment, then nodded toward a small bulletin board near the register. Pinned there was a handwritten flyer, edges curled. "Community meeting, youth voices welcome." Below it, in careful letters, was a name. Marcus read it twice. He didn't repeat it out loud. Some things, he understood now, were meant to be carried quietly. As he stepped back onto the street, Marcus felt the familiar pause settle over him again, longer this time, heavier. He had spent most of his life believing impact was something you measured after the fact. But standing there, receipt folded carefully in his pocket once more, he realized something else was being asked of him now. Not money. Not influence. Presence. And presence, he was beginning to understand, did not end when the meeting was over. Marcus returned to the community center the following week. Not as a donor. Not as a guest of honor. Not announced. He arrived early again, took a seat near the back, and waited. The room filled slowly, parents with tired eyes, teachers clutching folders, a few children slipping into chairs beside adults who whispered reminders to sit still. The air carried a low hum of familiarity, the kind that came from people who expected little and learned to work with what remained. Marcus watched. He noticed how often people spoke only after glancing at someone else first. How pauses were cut short, not by impatience, but by habit. Silence here wasn't dramatic, it was protective. Then she entered. She didn't look for him. She took a seat near the front this time, back straight, hands folded, eyes forward. Someone passed her a sheet of paper, and she nodded in thanks, reading it carefully. The meeting began. Discussions unfolded the way they always did, concerns raised, notes taken, promises hinted at but not named. Marcus listened, resisting the familiar urge to move things forward. Halfway through, the coordinator glanced at the agenda. "We have time for one more comment," she said. "If anyone." The girl raised her hand. The room shifted, not because she interrupted, but because she had done this before. "Yes," the coordinator said gently. The girl stood. "I don't want to ask for something new," she said. "I want to ask about something old." People leaned in. "Last year, we were told help was coming," she continued. And it did. For a while. Then it stopped. She paused, not to create drama, but to be sure the room was still with her. "My grandmother says when people leave quietly, it's worse than when they say no. Because you keep waiting." Marcus felt the words settle like weight. She looked around the room now, not searching, not accusing. If you stay, she said, people stop waiting. They start building. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind. The listening kind. Marcus stood. The movement drew attention immediately, not because of who he was, but because no one else had. I'd like to respond, he said. The coordinator hesitated only a moment before nodding. Marcus stepped forward, standing a few feet away from the girl. He didn't look down at her. He looked at the room. I've spent most of my life believing help was something you delivered, he said. I'm starting to understand it's something you return to. The girl didn't smile. She didn't need to. I can't promise everything, Marcus continued. But I can promise this, if we start something here, I won't disappear. A murmur moved through the room, not excitement, not applause. Recognition. Marcus turned slightly toward her. That question you asked me, he said. I think people remember the small things, when they're repeated. She met his eyes. Thank you for staying, she said. He nodded once. And in that moment, quiet, unrecorded, unshared, something fundamental changed. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Beat Stories HQ and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this grow because people carry them forward. As the meeting ended, Marcus didn't leave immediately. He helped stack chairs. He listened to conversations he would once have missed. He wrote down names, not to delegate later, but to remember. Outside, the evening settled gently over the street. The girl walked past him on her way out and paused. You answered my question, she said. Marcus smiled, just slightly. I'm still answering it, he replied. She nodded, satisfied. And for the first time since he'd met her, Marcus understood something clearly. Some promises don't change lives all at once. They change what you're willing to stay for. Marcus didn't announce his involvement. There was no press release, no foundation banner unfurled across the brick building, no sudden influx of unfamiliar faces with clipboards and deadlines. Instead, things shifted in smaller, almost unnoticeable ways. He returned the following week. And the week after that. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he didn't. Often, he simply listened, sitting in the same chair, taking notes in the same notebook, asking the same quiet questions at the end of discussions. What happens after? Who checks back? Who stays if this doesn't work the first time? At first, people answered cautiously, unsure whether these questions were rhetorical. Then they realized he was waiting for real answers. The girl noticed the change before anyone else. She arrived early one afternoon to help arrange chairs and found Marcus already there, sleeves rolled up, folding tables with a care that suggested he didn't see the task as beneath him. You're early, she said. So are you, he replied. She considered him for a moment. Most people stop coming after the third meeting. I know, Marcus said. Why didn't you? She asked, not suspiciously, just curious. Marcus paused, the question familiar in shape if not in wording. Because leaving quietly feels worse than saying no, he said. She nodded, satisfied. Over time, programs took shape, not rushed, not oversized. A reading group that met twice a week, staffed by volunteers who committed to a full semester. A small maintenance fund overseen by locals, not outsiders. A mentorship arrangement that paired children with adults who agreed to be present, not impressive. Marcus insisted on one rule above all others. No disappearing, he said. If something ends, it ends out loud. People laughed at first, unsure how to interpret it. Then they understood. One evening, as the sun lowered and the room emptied slowly, Marcus and the girl remained behind, stacking the last of the chairs. You never told me your name, she said suddenly. Marcus smiled. That's true. She waited. "Marcus," he said. She nodded once, filing it away. "I'm glad you came back, Marcus." "So am I," he replied. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I brought something," she said. Marcus recognized the careful way she handled it before he saw what it was. She unfolded it slowly. It was a drawing, simple, deliberate. A building with uneven windows. People standing together outside. One figure slightly taller than the rest, drawn without detail, standing among them rather than apart. "At first," she said, "I thought people only remembered big things." Marcus studied the drawing. "And now?" he asked. "Now I think they remember who comes back," she said. He nodded. "I think you're right." That night, Marcus placed the drawing beside the receipt on his desk. 2 pieces of paper. 2 promises kept in different ways. He realized then that the girl had never asked him to change the world. She had asked him to notice where it already was, and to stay long enough for it to recognize him in return. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. But inside that small room, something had settled into place. Not finished. Just begun. It happened quietly. No announcement. No build-up. No sense that the moment was important until it had already passed. Marcus arrived late that afternoon. Traffic had been heavier than usual, and by the time he stepped into the community center, the meeting was already underway. Voices carried softly through the hallway, layered with the scrape of chairs and the faint hum of the old lights. He paused at the door. Inside, the girl was standing. Not at the front. Not commanding the room. Just standing where she always did when she spoke, close enough to be heard, far enough to avoid attention. "We said we would check back," she was saying. "And today is the day we said." Marcus stayed where he was. Adults sat around the room, some nodding, some looking thoughtful, a few shifting uncomfortably. A man near the window cleared his throat. "We've had delays," he said. "Scheduling issues." The girl listened without interrupting. "I understand," she said. "But delays feel different when you're waiting." The room fell still. She wasn't accusing anyone. She wasn't emotional. She was reminding them, calmly, precisely, of something they had already agreed mattered. Marcus felt the weight of it settle in his chest. This wasn't a child repeating words she'd been taught. This was someone holding a line. After the meeting ended, Marcus approached her slowly. "You didn't look for me," he said. She glanced up, surprised. "You were busy." "Yes," Marcus said. "I was." She nodded, accepting the answer without judgment. "You remembered," he added. She frowned slightly. "Of course. You remembered to hold them to it," he clarified. She considered that. "My grandmother says promises don't need reminders," she said. "They need witnesses." Marcus smiled, small, genuine. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. "So am I," she replied. Later that evening, Marcus sat alone in his study again, the receipt and the drawing resting beside one another as they had for weeks now. He thought about the version of himself who had nearly walked past her. The one who believed impact came in large gestures and clean exits. That man felt distant now, not erased, but corrected. Marcus reached for his notebook and wrote something down, not a plan, not a strategy, but a sentence he didn't want to forget. "Stay long enough to be counted on." He closed the notebook and leaned back. Somewhere in the city, a girl was learning what leadership looked like without ever being told she was leading. And somewhere in himself, Marcus understood that what she had given him could never be repaid, not because it was too small, but because it had lasted. Years passed. Not dramatically. Not marked by headlines or sudden turns. Time moved the way it always did. Forward, quietly, carrying small changes that only became visible when you looked back long enough. Marcus grew older. His hair silvered at the temples. His schedule lightened, not because his influence waned, but because he chose where to place it more carefully. He no longer attended every meeting. He no longer needed to. Some places, he knew, had learned how to continue without him. The community center remained one of them. Marcus still came. Less often now. Sometimes unannounced. Sometimes only to sit in the back and listen. He was no longer a curiosity there. No one whispered when he entered. No one waited for him to speak. That was how he knew it had worked. On the wall near the entrance hung a simple board listing ongoing programs. No donor names. No plaques. Just schedules and contact numbers written neatly in marker and updated when needed. One afternoon, Marcus stood reading it when a familiar voice spoke behind him. "You're early." He turned. She was no longer a little girl. Her posture was the same, straight, calm, but she was taller now, older. Her face carried more lines of thought, less softness of childhood, but the steadiness remained untouched. "I try to be," Marcus said. She smiled. "Most people don't." They walked into the room together. She took a seat at the front this time, papers spread before her. People greeted her with easy familiarity, questions asked, opinions offered, attention given without hesitation. Marcus watched from the side. No one needed to be reminded to listen to her. During the meeting, she spoke only when necessary. She didn't fill silence. She let it do its work. When disagreements arose, she didn't rush to resolve them. She asked questions instead, the same kind Marcus had learned to ask years ago. What happens after? Who stays if this changes? Who is still here when it's quiet? Marcus recognized the rhythm immediately. He felt no pride. Only gratitude. Afterward, they stood near the doorway as people filtered out. "You kept your promise," she said. Marcus looked at her. "So did you." She shook her head slightly. "I promised to pay you back." "You did," Marcus replied. She frowned. "I never gave you anything." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He hadn't carried the receipt with him in years. It rested safely at home now, flattened and preserved. But its shape had never left him. "You gave me a reason to stay," he said. "That's not something you finish paying." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "My grandmother would like that answer," she said. "I hope so," Marcus replied. That evening, Marcus returned home and opened the drawer where he kept the papers that mattered most. The receipt. The drawing. The notebook with the sentence he had written long ago. He didn't look at them often. He didn't need to. Some lessons weren't meant to be revisited. They were meant to be carried. Marcus closed the drawer gently. The city outside continued its endless motion. But inside, one promise, made by a child who asked a single question, remained perfectly, quietly intact. The building didn't change much. The brick was still worn in places. The steps still uneven. The lights still hummed softly when evening meetings ran late. Anyone passing by might have missed it entirely, assuming it was just another forgotten space in a city full of them. But people remembered it. Not because of who funded it. Not because of who once stood there. Because of who stayed. On a quiet afternoon years later, a small group gathered in the main room. There was no ceremony planned, no ribbon, no speeches printed on thick paper. Just chairs arranged in a loose circle, voices low, familiar. At the center of it all, she stood. No podium. No microphone. Just presence. She thanked the volunteers who had been there from the beginning. She acknowledged those who had come later and stayed anyway. She spoke briefly, choosing her words the way she always had, carefully, without hurry. "We didn't build this by being loud," she said. "We built it by coming back." Heads nodded. Some smiled. At the back of the room, Marcus sat quietly, hands folded, listening. No one introduced him. No one needed to. After the gathering ended, people drifted out slowly, lingering in doorways, continuing conversations they weren't ready to leave yet. The air felt full, not of accomplishment, but of continuity. She approached Marcus near the exit. "You never answered my question completely," she said. Marcus looked at her, surprised. "I thought I did." She shook her head, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. "I asked if people remember the small things," she said. "You told me they remember what makes them stop." "And?" Marcus asked. She gestured around the room, the chairs, the walls, the quiet hum of life continuing. "I think they remember what makes them stay." Marcus felt the truth of it settle gently, without force. "Yes," he said. "I think you're right." Outside, the city moved as it always had. People hurried past. Cars idled. Voices rose and fell. Most of them would never know the story of how this place began, not the receipt, not the question, not the promise whispered between a child and a man who almost walked away. But that didn't matter. The small things had done their work. They always did. That evening, Marcus returned home and opened the drawer one last time. The receipt lay there, fragile now with age. The drawing, slightly faded. The notebook, its single sentence unchanged. He didn't take anything out. He simply closed the drawer again. Some legacies aren't meant to be displayed. They live quietly, passed hand to hand, question to question, promise to promise. And somewhere in the city, a young person raised their hand for the first time, not knowing who might listen. But trusting that someone would. Because someone once did. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Beat Stories HQ and tell me where you're watching from. These stories live on when they're shared, quietly, the way the most important things always do.